Hi, everybody. My talk tonight is going to be about Babel plugin development fundamentals. I'm Giuseppe. You can find my Twitter, blog, etc. at giuseppe.pizza. That's easy enough to guess. Easier than my Twitter handle for sure. Before we start, who's never used Babel before?
Who's never used it?
Yeah, just like even a Babel plugin. Nobody? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to explain what it is in a minute. And who's never written a Babel plugin before instead? Yeah, that's roughly 70% of the room. My goal is to hopefully show you that writing Babel plugins is not rocket science. It's actually very empowering and could be even fun. You know? Yeah, I mean, those are like, this kind of ideas you have under the shower, and then, knowledge is power, and with Babel, you could realize that. In order to do this, we're going to transform some code. If you haven't figured it out by now, I like pizza a lot. And this is a piece of JSX, and on screen you can see a pizza element, which takes a prop called ingredients, which is an array of ingredients, tomato sauce, mozzarella, ham, and pineapple. And since I'm Italian, pineapple is a no-no for me, so we're going to get rid of that with a Babel plugin, right? And in order to do this, we're going to use a tool that is called AST Explorer, and you can find it at astexplorer.net. And in a nutshell, it's basically a tool like JSFiddle, JSBin, or CodePen. And the way I work is that it is organized in panels. And on the top left, you have your source code, in our case, our piece of JSX that we want to transform. On the top right, an AST, which stands for Abstract Syntax Tree, and in a minute I will explain what that is. And to the bottom left, our plugin, which is going to be used to transform our code, and eventually at the bottom right, the result. And I mentioned AST and Abstract Syntax Tree, and just to be clear, this is how, in a nutshell, Babel works. It takes some source code, it parses it, it generates this tree representation of it, and then it starts to traverse this tree, and as it visits nodes in the tree, it applies plugins to transform those nodes based on your instructions. And once it's done, it takes this transformed tree and it serializes back to a string, which is your transform code. And we use this every day, pretty much. And that's what happens every time you build an application with Babel. So the abstract syntax tree, as I said, is basically a more computer-friendly representation of your code, which is describing basically your code on the left. And in our case, you can see highlighted on screen pineapple, which is a node like the others in the tree, and is a string literal whose value is obviously pineapple. And a tip here that I use myself is that whenever I'm not quite sure what is some piece of JavaScript syntax called, I just throw in the code in AST Explorer, and then I go inspect the tree and figure out how to call that specific thing. Maybe, I don't know if it happens to you, but there is a function and it can take argument, and I've seen people being confused whether those are called arguments or parameters. I mean, those are very nits, but there are other pieces that might be less obvious to you. And in our case, the attribute that we want to modify is a JSX attribute. That's how it is called technically. The keyword ingredients is a identifier, JSX identifier. The curly brackets are a JSX expression container. The square brackets, the array itself, it's an array expression, and then every ingredient is a string literal. So moving on from the ST part to the plugins, basically plugins are functions. It's a simple function right there that exports a string, an object that has a not a mandatory name. I put pizza plugin there, but it could be anything, or it could be even omitted. But the important bit is that you also define a visitor property that is an object. And inside the object, you put a bunch of functions that basically match, whose name matches a node in the tree. And that's the node that you want to modify. In our case, we have this attribute that is ingredients, and we're writing a function JSX attribute that matches this specific node, type of node. And so as Babel traverses the tree, whenever it finds a JSX attribute, it's going to call our function with that path, and then some state that for now is not relevant. So path has information about the current path, which, as the name suggests, is the path to that node, and then the node itself, that is a simpler object that has a type, start and end of line in the source code, and the node information itself. And that's what you do. You get a path from Babel in your plugin, and the path has a method called get, which allows you to select the properties in that node. So in our case, we have a JSX attribute, and we want to take the right part, so the value of it. So the name is ingredient, the right part is the value. And in the screen, I'm just logging them in the console, and you can see the first logs the path, the second logs the node, and the last is basically an helper function on the path object that we can use to determine whether this is in fact an expression. And so our plugin then becomes just a few lines. We just need to go and find this list of ingredients and just get rid of the one that we don't like. And so first we get the value of the prop, and that will be a JSX expression container. If it's not an expression container, we just bail out because it's not of our interest. Otherwise, we move on, and now from the expression, we want to get the array expression. And that's what we're doing there. And similarly to what we did before, we just bail out if it's not an array. And once we have that, the node of that expression has our elements that are basically string literals nodes. And what we can do is a simple filter and remove the one whose values is pineapple. That's basically all it takes to write such a plugin. It's not that much of a big deal. Again, we are visiting an attribute. We get the value that is an expression. We get the expression itself contained there. That is an array, and then we filter out the element that we don't like. So from there, what's next? Obviously, you can create new nodes with Babel, and thanks to a library called Babel types, which Babel automatically injects passes to every plugin, and you can access it by destructuring it from the arguments up there and its types. And basically, this library has a lot of helpers to create nodes. And in our case, we're just creating a new string literal with a value of mushroom and pushing it into the elements array that are our ingredients. And similarly, there is a function that is on the path that could be used to replace the entire node. So imagine you wanted to replace our ingredients prop with the type and just the name of the pizza you wanted. You can just call path.replace with and pass in the new node, which is basically the replacement. And you can do even remove nodes with path.remove, and there is a whole bunch of advanced things that you can check out on the Babel handbook. You just look it up on Google and you will find it, because there's just one, and it's been translated in many languages. I believe even in German. And yeah, so that's really it. It's not that much. I think Babel is really awesome, and it's really more than a tool for transpiling new syntax. In fact, a few years ago, I was like React Europe, and there was Sebastian, the creator of Babel, who was invited over on stage to answer a few questions, and one of which was like whether he thought that Babel eventually will die off once modern browser would catch up with modern features and things like that. And well, I think my answer there will be no, because I mean, unless there is a new tool that does similar things but just better, the concept itself is really nice, because we obviously use it to transpile syntax, but nowadays we also use it for many other things like refactoring and code transformations. You can use it, it's used a lot in CSS and JS libraries to optimize for server-side rendering or otherwise building ahead of time. And yeah, it can be used for many things. And it's really empowering, and I've had a few moments of like, because I knew I could do those things, I was like, all of a sudden you get all those crazy ideas and you can try them out in a browser with a tool like AST Explorer. And in fact, it's one of probably my favorite programming hobbies. And also it's really nice because it's really enables true test-driven development, which is often like a something that we really want to do, but probably very hard managed to do. And in this case, instead, it's really easy because you probably know ahead of time what would be your desired result, right? We knew ahead of time we wanted that code without that ingredient. And basically what we would do then when in development is just keep asserting that our transformed code matches our expectation, and otherwise iterating until the condition is met. So make sure you check out AST Explorer, Babel Handbook, and the Babel types docs, because those are really essential. I think even if you ask the most skilled, known people in the industry, there's probably started or still use those. I still do. I mean, I'm not a guru on that, but on the topic, but yeah. And basically at the same time, if you get a chance, thanks those people, Felix Kling, who is the creator of AST Explorer, and James Call for writing the Babel handbook back then. Now it's probably out of the project, but he's been core maintainer of Babel and also wrote this awesome book, which is available on GitHub. And obviously the Babel team and all the contributors that do an amazing job for free. So yeah, that's all I had. Oh, that was easy.
Do you have any questions about the presentation, or yeah?
I have one question. Like, can you tell me a real-world example where you used actually Babel configuration? Because for me, it's like really unimaginable to just cannot solve by JavaScript, and you just actually need to go into the transpiler configuration and rewrite the whole transpilation with a plugin. It would be the last thing what I would do. So how can I imagine what is the situation where this scenario could happen?
So like when it's essential to use Babel, otherwise you couldn't.
So when should I do that?
What's the use
When
case?
would you write up, like, when would you use Babel?
Yeah, in a corporate situation. So like in a
Code
project.
refactoring.
So one example is Facebook. They use AST transformation to refactor code. For example, they migrated from React.create class, which was the old way of creating classes, to ES6 classes transforming code. Would have been otherwise crazy to do that by hand. There are plenty of other applications depending on your need, really. I'm co-author of a CSS in JS library that is completely written with Babel, and it basically transforms JS6 to automatically add scoped classes to your JS6, so you don't have to do it by hand. There are many applications. Another application, for example, recently Jason Miller from Google wrote a set of transforms to fix browser bugs. So you write the code that you think would work on those browsers, but then if you run it on a browser in some browsers, it wouldn't just work. And he wrote transforms so that you could still keep writing the right code for it. But I think it's then up to your creativity, or based on you. Normally, you don't have to. In my opinion, you don't have to, try to spot the use cases until it comes clear to your eyes that you need this thing, right? It's not like I hang out on the street and think, what can I do with Bob?
I think I just had kind of a use case 2 months ago. It was just something, it wasn't React, it was kind of something with Vue.js, and you can extend components there, so you can have one master one and you can just extend them and have your subclass component somehow, and it works with code, but for Vue it didn't work for templates. So you couldn't extend the template logic. So if you just wanted to add something, and there was a big discussion on Stack Overflow how to get around this, and it was just a big hack with lots of ugly hacks, and then someone solved it with writing a Babel transform plugin, and now it just works quite easy that you can just also extend in a quite easy way these templates, also now just use it in my new projects as well. This was something where I said, well, heck, this works, and it just solved my problems. And
I mean, and the same concepts apply to CSS, HTML, many other languages. Even if you go to astexplorer.net, you'll see that you have a whole bunch of languages available. I think even C++, other languages. And that's also how post-CSS works.
I think one really useful use case is if you have a library and you're changing the API, but you can see that like from one API to the other, you could make it just with a Power plugin, then this would be really handy because people can upgrade your library, just run a code mod, boom, they're done. No work left to them. Yeah, and this will help you actually to upgrade I'll let people update more easily.
Right.
And if you don't do work, it will take longer and you probably get more requests for all the versions and so on. And this, in fact, is what React did, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Some-
Yeah, exactly. Another interesting use case, which is more recent, is the Fox Gatsby actually are building a tool called Blocks UI, which is a visual editor for real production code. So you can basically load your actual production React application, and it will render like a design tool, and you can then start to modify your code with this visual tool, and then save back to file and just ship it. And in order to do that, they basically use Babel to patch the code so they can do modification. Like you can make your React component draggable, and you can modify that.
One of the use case may be if you're stuck in a jam and you want to change your whole application and you have like some big errors in the code that you have, and you want to upgrade to a new style. So but there's no code mod available for it. Like there's no React 15 to 16 code mod for your specific problem. Then you would write your own code mod. This is what I did because I was converting from CoffeeScript to ES6, and it didn't quite convert the right way. So I had to write this code mod that fixed all the problems. So yeah, if you're stuck in a jam and you have to change 50,000 JavaScript files, then there are other options.
Yeah, so one of the points is that instead of doing this search and replace in VS Code, we actually write transformation, and then we can it's more powerful. So, but I was just thinking maybe someone should write something like jQuery but for Babel plugins.
Yeah, there is kind of something like that, but I don't find it easier to use. But it exists, and it's actually what Facebook uses for their code mods, and it's called JS Code Shift.
Yeah, JS Code Shift. Yeah. So there's a specific tool to write these code mods that makes it easier. So to look it up later. Maybe we get presentation one day.